Many people have had that game they thought they were better than all of their friends at, and decided to take on the worldwide competitive scene to continue their dominance. The thing is, 99% of people fail at this dream and quit. But this is the story of one of the exceptions. It's 2011, at the finals of the Washington, D.C. Regional Pokémon Tournament, where two players have fought their way through the entire single elimination bracket. You might know Pokémon from the anime, trading card game, or any host of other outlets. But this tournament was for Pokémon's dedicated competitive video game scene, VGC. For an IP marketed to children, its competitive scene has included some very intense matches, with this one being no exception. Mitch, the player on the left, has garnered a bit of a reputation as a strong player, placing well at the last couple of tournaments, while his opponent, Wolfey, who is barely old enough for this age division, is getting used to the pressure, as this is his first ever tournament, and if he wins, he receives a paid trip to the national finals next month. For VGC, each player chooses 6 Pokemon for their team, secretly chooses 4 to bring into battle, and then 2 to have out on the battlefield at a time, instead of 1. Wolfey entered the match with a team centered around a powerful move he had been using the whole tournament, while his opponent entered the match with a team full of obstacles to beat this specific move. This move was known as Trick Room. Trick Room flips the game on its head. Normally, both players choose moves for their Pokemon, and those with the highest speed stats will carry out theirs first. Trick Room flips the order of moves, meaning certain strong and slow Pokemon are able to attack first and take over the game. If Wolfey can get this move out uncontested and abuse it properly, he would be set to win, and the mind game would be when he would pull the trigger. After bluffing using the move on turn 1, Wolfey would activate Trick Room on turn 2. However, he wouldn't be able to get his way so easily. Mitch would activate his own Trick Room with his Musharna, which reverses the order of moves again, effectively nullifying Wolfey's core strategy for now. Moves later, he would successfully set Trick Room up. However, his opponent would set up his next obstacle, Amogus. He would use his Amogus to put his Hydreigon to sleep, preventing Wolfey from using a successful Trick Room activation to his advantage. He may have gotten the move up, but now, with one of his more powerful Pokemon asleep, and both of his Pokemon damaged from his earlier mind games, he was now on his back foot, close to the game falling out of his reach. This match was best of 1, no second chances, and if he lost, he wouldn't receive the free trip across the country to nationals, meaning this 15-year-old's career would end before it even started. Wolfey would manage to win his first ever tournament at his first ever appearance, allowing his career to continue. This one match would kickstart one of the greatest careers in Pokemon history, encapsulating immense amounts of preparation, persistence, and effort in order to pursue the crowning achievement of any Pokemon player, to become the world champion and receive the title of a true Pokemon master. But as of right now, this kid has a shot to qualify for the World Championships through the 2011 US National Tournament. Pokemon tournaments have a rather unique structure. In this tournament, all players who qualified would play 7 rounds of Swiss pools. At the end, everyone is ranked by their records and seeded into one final bracket. In some tournaments, depending on how low you place on this leaderboard, you may not make it to the final bracket. However, in this tournament, that wasn't quite a problem, as after recording a 5-2 record, Wolfey would qualify for the final bracket. As the 14th seed, the odds weren't necessarily in his favor. To be fair, most of his competitors were better than anyone he had faced back in DC, and on the surface level, had much more experience than him. As well, the entire final bracket was single elimination, such that any small mistake could mean the end of his hopes for the World Championships. Going into this tournament, Wolfey hadn't made any major changes to his team, and understandably so, as forming any tournament-ready team requires hundreds, if not thousands of hours of practice matches to be ready for any multitude of different strategies. The full depth of the strategy within the mind games of Pokemon would take far too long to explain, but commonly, Pokemon is referred to as a mix of chess and poker. Similar to chess, players have to prepare a general strategy for the matches and memorize some of the best moves in a multitude of situations. Similar to poker, from the start, players get into a variety of mind games. For instance, if your upcoming opponent had been watching your previous matchup, they would likely infer that you would bring out two specific Pokemon first and adjust their starting lineup accordingly. And if you knew that they were watching, you would adjust, and so on. Succeeding in Pokemon tournaments requires being extremely well prepared, as well as being able to think on the fly when obstacles come about. And the additional pressure of a tournament setting works to make a competitive game that is incredibly unforgiving. However, this young prodigy didn't have to deal with any major obstacles yet, as he had managed to advance to the top 4 of the bracket. A top 4 finish at this tournament meant qualification for the World Championships in San Diego, which should have been good news for everyone, but when you're an unemployed 15-year-old kid, you have to rely on getting first place in order to secure the only paid flight to the tournament you've dreamed of competing in. But unfortunately, that future came into serious jeopardy, as in the semifinals, Wolfey's opponent had a team he seemingly wasn't ready for. As mentioned earlier, Wolfey's primary strategy revolved around setting up the move Trick Room, and then using his normally slow and strong Pokemon to put big damage on the opposing team. His opponent seemingly managed to flip the narrative. If he used his own slow Pokemon, it didn't matter whether Trick Room was activated or not. All it took was some good reads on Wolfey's defense, and he was in the advantage. On his back foot, confronted by an opponent well prepared against his team, Wolfey would have to show his adaptability, and he would start the next game with the same 2 Pokemon, seemingly not learning from his mistakes, and his opponent would look to take advantage of this, gearing up for a large attack against his Cofagrigus. Unfortunately for his opponent, Wolfey proved that if you caught him off his balance once, it would be even harder to do a second time. And the finals would tell a similar story. This kid was headed to Worlds. Wolfey's astronomic rise to the world scene naturally brought about a lot of attention. Winners from all the other international finals began to prepare their teams for the World Tournament. Wolfey had shown he was capable of adapting to any team he had encountered so far, but there was a concern that perhaps any of the international players would put that reputation in jeopardy. That fear would be well founded, but not for the reason you may think. There weren't only 4 players from the US that qualified for this tournament. There were 5. The 2010 World Champion, Ray Rizzo, automatically qualified for the following year's tournament, but still chose to spectate US regionals and nationals, and one player in particular caught his eye. When spectating national finals, Rizzo took note of how Wolfey's team relied on Trick Room, and how the only person who got close to beating him used a slow and strong Pokemon as counterplay. So when the time came, Rizzo chose this strategy but took it to the extreme, adding a Pokemon no one else at the whole tournament had brought, a Scavalier. With an extremely low base speed stat and very high attack stat, this Pokemon would be near unusable against any other strategy. It was clear that this team was designed to beat Trick Room, or rather, to beat the up-and-comer. However, the reigning world champion didn't have an easy path to victory, as despite the preparation, Wolfey was still able to take Game 1, and have a lead in Game 2, until... In Game 3, both players were in a relatively even game, as Rizzo subbed in his trap card, and took a bet on an unsuspecting move, Iron Head. Iron Head is a physical attack that does decent damage, but also has a 30% chance to make the opposing Pokemon flinch, effectively making them lose a turn. In the most contentious point of the match, Rizzo threw out the move, and Rizzo would use that small advantage to take the match and officially eliminate Wolfey from the tournament. And afterwards, he would have a relatively smooth path for the rest of the tournament, becoming the first ever 2-time Pokémon World Champion. In a later interview, Rizzo would credit Wolfey as being his hardest opponent of the whole season, commenting on how he was impressed with the strength of the rookie who would almost manage to prevent his win. But also, he mentioned that his best advice for anyone who wanted to beat him was to use more unexpected Pokemon. Ray's message was clear: if you want to beat me, surprise me. But don't be shocked if I'm already ready for it. So Wolfey took that challenge and entered the new season with a fire inside of him. In 2012, the legal list of Pokemon expanded to include nearly 500 more, meaning the range of possible strategies grew tremendously. Still getting a hang of the new meta, Wolfey managed to place second at the nearest regional championships. This year, his team was nearly unrecognizable from his previous, and so was the strategy. His team no longer heavily relied on a move such as Trick Room. Rather, this team consisted of different strengths in an attempt to be ready for any strategy. And that seemed to be true, as he would once again place first at Nationals soon after. Although once again, a key adversary wasn't competing. This time around, Rizzo had committed to a 10-month break from the game competitively, as the 2-time champion was unsure if there was anything left for him to accomplish. However, 2 months before Worlds, Rizzo decided he would try for the three-peat. With a lag of time to prepare, he wouldn't study up on his competitors as intently, but rather choose an offensively versatile team, and relied more on his intuition to adapt to any specific strategies that his opponent came up with. Going into Worlds, Wolfey had taken a gamble that his own well-rounded team couldn't necessarily be hard counterpicked, and this year, that seemed to be the case. He made his way through Swiss pools with a relatively good record, although his rival did as well. It felt like since the prior year, Wolfey knew that there was only one player who could stop his rise to the top, and the year's grand finals would come to present the world with this battle. For the first time, Wolfey found himself in the finals of the World Championship, one match away from achieving his ultimate goal, and any spectator paying close attention could tell that he was trying to hide some serious nerves. To be fair, reaching the pinnacle of any sport within 2 years is extremely rare, and coming out on top is near impossible. On the other hand, Rizzo was noticeably calm, sitting in grand finals for the 3rd year in a row. But his nerves were also about to be tested.
We're starting off with close combat.
Right.
The crowd seems very energetic.
Yeah, absolutely. You'll notice it. Oh, wow. Critical hit to start the match, and Metagross goes down.
Wolfey would get the 6.25% chance of his close combat to crit and get a one-hit KO on Rizzo's Metagross. But Rizzo would turn this game into an offensive contest. Round 1 KOs are not the most common, but this game started with 2. Wolfey would then get another critical hit with his Thundurus, although not KOing. He needed this luck to transfer into momentum, so he could calm his nerves and get an advantage against the player no one had been able to eliminate for the past 3 years. As previously mentioned, Wolfey's team was designed to have no apparent weaknesses, with the Pokemon types and moves chosen as an attempt to cover all possible bad matchups. The problem is, when trying to make a team designed to shield against all possible strategies, a level of offense is lost. To be fair, Wolfey at least brought in one Pokemon against Rizzo that was primarily catered towards offense, and that was already accounted for. Sure, the core of Wolfey's team was able to hold up decently well due to their defensive synergy, but there was no way to crack the wall that was Rizzo's expert gameplay. So upon losing his second Pokemon, Wolfey forfeited Game 1. After all of the work and preparation, this had seemed like the year where it was all supposed to come together. In fact, this was the year where the scene's most dominant force was seemingly at his most vulnerable. But now, on his back foot, it was up to Wolfey to prove that hard work should beat talent. Wolfey entered Game 2 cautious but determined, but kept his offensive powerhouse in his back pocket as to avoid any early onslaught. With both players playing defensively, the match would come to an early stalemate, as they would continue to shuffle their Pokemon, unable to find a hole in each other's teams. Wolfey would stick to defensive moves such as Protect and Substitute, as well as keeping his main offense off of the field. It seemed as if Wolfey was trying to minimize the risks in order to play for a timeout. If the game timer ran out, the player with more Pokemon and HP won, so all he needed was to find an opening against Rizzo and hold the lead. And that opening supposedly came, as Wolfey would take the risk of throwing out close combat with his Hitmontop, a fighting type move which lowered his own defense but did a lot of damage against rock and dark type Pokemon. And the moment seemed perfect to shock Rizzo with a big hit to his Tyranitar. Except, Wolfey misclicked and selected the move on Cresselia instead. Rizzo took this on the chin and accepted the invitation to up the tempo. In a moment he thought should have been his, Wolfey made some key mistakes and lost his chance to complete his climb to the top of competitive Pokemon. This moment would be immortalized in the DLC for Pokemon Black and White 2, where an in-game boss titled World Champion Ray Rizzo was added, as well as a runner-up boss for Wolfey. Wolfey took the loss hard, but managed to stay determined to get his next shot. From going from a nobody to someone near the very top of the Pokemon scene, he had learned how to improve, and in his mind, all he had to do was continue down this path, and his time to wear the World Championship crown was inevitable. The 2013 season would be played on Pokemon Black and White 2, with a relatively similar rule set. The meta wouldn't see too many major changes, but Wolfey would completely overhaul his team, with no Pokemon staying the same from his World Championship squad. Although, the team would lean more into the same defensive control archetype he was playing with the prior year. If he was able to make it to second place in Worlds playing more defensively, why not keep the ball rolling? To say the least, 2013 was shaping to be Wolfey's worst season competitively up to that point. In both regionals and nationals, for the first time ever, he was unable to qualify to the main bracket out of pools, and placed outside of the top 8. However, due to a new qualification system, he was still able to go to the World Championships. Maybe the whole season had been him finding his footing with his new team, and Worlds would be his opportunity to finally get over the hump. Wolfey would receive his worst finals performance in the past 3 years, placing 25th in the pools phase of the tournament. Ironically, he would place right above his rival, who after becoming a 3-time world champion, dedicated this year's tournament to playing with a self-described joke team, before beginning to fade into retirement. Many players around Wolfey and Rizzo's age began to enter a new phase of life. Rizzo followed the path many do, slowly falling away from the hobby to primarily focus on studies. But Wolfey was in a more conflicting scenario. After once again going winless during the 2014 and 15 seasons, failing to make the final bracket at the World Championships either time, that idea first began to creep into his mind, of joining his rival in retirement. The painful thing was that unlike his rival, he wouldn't have that satisfaction of having a peaceful retirement. If he were to quit now, his career would be the story of someone who came so close to the top, yet it was seemingly never meant to be. So in 2016, he continued to push, and finally started to taste some success once again, landing himself on top of the in-game competitive leaderboard, and placing 3rd at a regional as well as 1st at another, while improving his team in preparation of the US National Championships. For the first time in a while, things were looking up. Allegedly, Wolfey's team was leaked to multiple other top players, which would play a role in his worst nationals performance ever. The desire to call it quits was arguably the highest it had ever been. For every story of a hot up-and-comer who becomes the best in the world, there are dozens of others who fizzle out shy of their goal. It was up to Wolfey now to prove how badly he didn't want to be part of the ladder. But to reach the very top, he knew he would have to switch things up. The winner of the youngest age division at Wolfey's first ever tournament would come to play a pivotal role in the upcoming World Championships. Dejected after his disappointing finish at Nationals, and only 6 weeks left to prepare for Worlds, Wolfey began to discuss with some friends regarding what team he would bring if he would end up competing. Among these friends was Brandon Zhang, the junior Pokémon World Champion of 2013. Around the time of Nationals, a team consisting of 6 incredibly cohesive Pokémon was dominating the scene. This team was known as the Big Six. Players carrying a version of the Big Six team were a large reason for Wolfey's early elimination in Nationals. His attempts to find a way to break this team with the bulky defensive style he had grown accustomed to for the past couple of years hadn't been working. So he and his friends began to experiment with more aggressive teams. They experimented with dozens of different Pokémon, creating documents full of calculations detailing how each Pokémon could do against one of the Big Six, no matter the stats and items. After all that work, they came upon a team that seemingly had the offensive power and adaptability to beat all the meta teams. Wolfey dedicated himself to giving his all at another World Championships, but having just overhauled his team within the past month, nothing was certain. But he had already experienced failure, and he knew what came from trying to play scared. So going into this tournament, he chose to trust his preparation and go into his matches not scared of the outcome.
Down to red health, so Raichu able to survive a lot of attacks there, and it survived with 1 hit point? Origin Pulse connects. So Origin Pulse connecting to on both of Blake's Pokemon will be able to pick up the double KO, and Wolf advances.
Lean from Xerneas, going to be a really strong attack, but as we already know, that Rayquaza does have the focus dash.
So Wolf should be able to take this by time.
Justin just needed literally 30 extra seconds.
Yeah, because Justin has his match in the bag, but because, you know, Wolf playing to his outs, so, you know, props to Wolf for recognizing
In the
that.
top 4, Wolfey faced off against Marcus, one of his friends that helped put together their team. At the beginning of the match, Marcus told Wolfey, whichever one of us wins this match, wins the tournament. And after the match came to its conclusion, Wolfey would be the one representing this team the following day in Grand Finals. Wolfey would stay up the night prior, on the cusp of his second World's Grand Finals, wondering what he could do to mix up his opponent. But he could only plan so much, as the match soon arrived. And just like that, 4 years later, he was back in the same position he was against Ray Rizzo. He was no longer a kid anymore. Now, at the age of 21, he was in a completely different stage of life, but still, he had chosen to be in pursuit of the same goal. His opponent would be Jonathan Evans, who had been on the best run of his career, using a team led by Primal Groudon and Primal Kyogre. However, Jonathan's key traits weren't only game-related, as he also had a habit of being rather expressive during his matches, which Wolfey wasn't necessarily fond of. And allegedly, he was one of the players that contributed to Wolfey's poor performance at Nationals. Wolfey would open up the match with Rayquaza and Kyogre, a different opening than the last time these two played, while Jonathan would open up with Gengar and Kyogre. When choosing their first moves, Wolfey decided to try to mix up Jonathan once again by switching out his Rayquaza to the most unexpected Pokemon on his team, a special event Raichu. Evans, clearly not expecting the switch, let alone Raichu, says another statement of frustration to seemingly try to get Wolfey's attention. During this match, there was not only the game playing out on screen, but also the game being played by the two right in front of each other. Later in the match, after his Bronzong barely survived a water spout attack from Wolfey, Evans would pump his fist and raise up in his chair. In sports, and especially in high-stakes scenarios, it's a common strategy for players to be over the top in their reactions to potentially get their opponents off their game. Although it's not clear if this was his intention, Evans would take the opportunity to be rather expressive at any pivotal point in the match.
Kyogre actually, so dealing a good amount of damage back to it, weakening this water spout a little bit. Not going to deal enough to Kyogre. Gengar actually will survive because of that, and Thunder enough for Kyogre, but the Raichu switch in. Raichu will take that Thunder for Wolf. Although, of course, there is the extreme speed, so no protect. Extreme speed will connect with Kyogre. Does it survive? No! Kyogre will go down. The Blades from Groudon will connect with Raichu. Wolf seemed to think it would not be enough for the KO before, but it is enough for a one-hit KO.
With the timer of the match going down quickly, the threat of the game going to timeout began to be more apparent, and currently, Wolfey had a small advantage in that aspect. But Jonathan was still hanging on due to his Gengar, but not for long.
Would have liked to have that much earlier on, but I just don't. Dragon Ascent.
Into the
Gengar! Wolf picks up the Dragon Ascent off the Gengar, and I don't think there is any way that Jonathan can pull this one off.
With little time left on the clock, Wolfey was able to switch out his Rayquaza and use Wide Guard with his Hitmontop in order to secure Game 1. Although he was up 1-0, Wolfey was still visibly stressed. Up on stage, with thousands watching in person and online, he had the opportunity to finally accomplish what he always wanted. But on the other hand, there was the chance he would fail. Despite all of his preparation, he could succumb to the pressure and lose the next 2 games, and forever be known as the guy who got second place at Worlds twice. In this moment, he accepted there was a realistic chance everything could fall apart, but he didn't let that break his focus. This match would come to be much more even, as halfway through the match, Wolfey had a 1 Pokemon lead, but his were considerably more in danger than Jonathan's. As well, Jonathan had his Groudon on the field, a Pokemon with the potential to one-hit KO any of Wolfey's Pokemon. Due to the game state, Wolfey's Pokemon were also slower than Jonathan's, so playing defensively here simply wouldn't work. On the cusp of going 1-1 in the set, Wolfey had to think of a way out of this situation. Instead of playing a conventional move, defending his weak Rayquaza, or attempting an attack on Jonathan's key Pokemon, Wolfey took a risk. To fake out Bronzong instead of Groudon, and use Swords Dance, a move that would add a massive attack boost to his Rayquaza the following turn. But this would be at the risk of leaving his Rayquaza wide open to get KO'd. If Jonathan would go for an attack on his Rayquaza with his Groudon, the match would go to a final game to determine the world champion. But if Jonathan predicted a more conventional move from Wolfey, and instead used Protect, the door would be left wide open for Wolfey.
Rayquaza does.
Oh, this could be the turn!
If it gets the damage off, it may be what makes Wolf the world champion. Rayquaza's Delta Stream now out on the field. Groudon protects.
Oh, Wolf.
Oh, what did Wolf do? Did Wolf attack that Groudon? So Bronzong's not going to be able to move. Groudon's not going to take any damage here, but nothing else.
Oh, he calls it!
Oh, he went for the Swords Dance.
That might have just won Wolfe Glick the World Championship.
After all the obstacles and hard work, Wolfey had made true the promise he had made to himself 6 years earlier. He had officially become the Pokémon World Champion. This match would prove not only to be the climax of his own self-journey, but also as the launchpad for his life to take a completely different direction. Instead of having to slowly fade away from the game after college, this match would lead to an increased level of publicity on his YouTube channel, which would eventually lead him to massive success, and to the life of being a full-time Pokemon player. He would come to win a couple more national and regional tournaments. However, as of 2025, 2016 proves to still be his only time standing on the very top. There's a world where Wolfey, like many others, gave up after any multitude of failures he had encountered on his way up to the top. But his determination to persist beyond everything, even when it seemed like it wasn't meant to be for him, led to it all being worth it.